All right, so welcome everyone to the next installment of the GVI Workshop Series, Sustaining the Work. I'm Michael Akampora. I'm a Research and Policy Advisor here at NNSC. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first time, or if you've been to a bunch of these sessions, or if you've watched them, we're happy to have you with us. So just a little background on us, on NNSC before we get started. NNSC, or the National Network for Safe Communities, is an action research center based at John Jay College for Criminal Justice here in New York City that implements proven strategic interventions to reduce violence, improve public safety, improve trust with the community, and transform public safety in partnership with those communities around the world. This workshop series is meant for new, interested, and returning partners to this work. So the National Network is just that. It's a network of cities and jurisdictions all around the country and world who work with us, NNSC, to do this work, to implement these violence reduction strategies. These workshops are meant for folks who are new to this work. So working in sites that are not currently in contract with NNSC or working with NNSC, folks who are on sites that have a relationship with NNSC, but they themselves are new to the work, and things like that. They're a space to learn more about and discuss violence prevention, focus deterrence, and new innovations in the field. We mostly discuss GVI, the group violence intervention, but we've touched on some of our other interventions along the way, including the intimate partner violence intervention, which we had a great workshop in the fall, which you could watch online on our website, which we'll provide the link for at the end. And in these workshops, you'll hear from experienced NNSC staff members who do this work every day, along with partners from our sites around the country and world who also are doing this work and are kind of constantly in touch with us as we develop these interventions and work on implementing them together. Each session will involve presentations and then roundtable conversations where you'll be able to participate in conversation with us, ask questions, kind of think about how these could apply in your own site and bring that knowledge back to you. And the sessions are open to all who are interested in exploring the GVI approach to violence reduction in their communities, whether it's community-based organizations, social service providers, law enforcement, municipal workers, researchers. Anybody who's interested in doing this work in their community is welcome here. So what we're going to do now is just quickly go into breakout rooms. All right, so welcome back, folks. So today's session is about sustaining the work. And thus far in the workshops, we've been talking all about GVI, the group violence intervention ecosystem. And we've talked about the three-legged stool that we kind of compare it to, which is law enforcement partners, community moral voices, and support and outreach as the legs, and then the project manager as the seat that kind of brings it all together, oversees everything, and makes sure everything is kind of moving forward and everyone is working in lockstep to implement and make sure the work is being done with the highest level of fidelity and legitimacy as possible. And so we've done deep dives into each of those facets. So we had a session on law enforcement, community more voices, support and outreach, and the project manager. You could watch all of those online. But today's session is about how to kind of keep the stool itself together and how to maintain the stool, maintain the work, and make sure that the work is able to continue with personnel changes over time, things like that. So the topic is sustaining the work. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megan McDonald, for the feature presentation, where we're going to dive a little deeper into that. So over to you, Megan.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. For those I have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is Megan McDonald, and I'm on the leadership team here at the National Network. And I'm excited to talk with you this afternoon, or at least to lay some foundations to hear from other folks about what it means to sustain this work. So part of what makes these workshops really exciting and interesting, I think, is that everyone's coming from different places, not just geographically, which that's true as well, but also in terms of where you are in the work related to group violence intervention or other violence prevention strategies. So just naming that some of this might feel a little bit beyond where people are. But I think that's okay, because it can be really helpful to start thinking about how are we going to keep this going before you even get the work started, as opposed to trying to sort of reverse engineer it once the work is underway. So if you're feeling like, oh, wait a second, this is, this is like the master's level, I'm not ready. You're right where you should be. And I think it'll be useful, hopefully, nonetheless. So if anyone has done the group violence intervention, or, a strategy like this in the past, that it's really difficult to get it started. And we spent the past, Michael will know, 8 or 9 sessions of this workshop series talking about each of the components of this intervention, from identifying those closest to the problem and sharing information about that so we can engage with them, to actually engaging with them, and so on and so forth, and kind of breaking down that 3-legged stool that Michael just presented. And getting it off the ground is really difficult, but for those that have done the work, and we have many people in this room that have had fits and starts and have also sustained it for some time, that we're going to be excited to hear from as we get into the discussion portion of this. But that almost is nothing compared to seeing this through for years, through political changeover, and political agenda differences and priority shifting and funding changes. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And I think the most important thing to be thinking about when we talk about sustaining the work, or at least a foundational thing, is to stay focused. It can be really easy for things to start to shift in terms of the scope or the focus of the work, especially if things are going well. GVI can become a place where problems are being brought in, different problems and different focuses. And it can be difficult then to keep everyone moving toward the same thing. It's true that there are challenges in a city, many different challenges are intersectional. So it could make sense, if we have young people engaging in gun violence, to start talking about, programming in school, and that might be relevant because we're focused on the right people. And then all of a sudden the scope, shifts and expands, and we're talking about something that has nothing to do with engaging with those at the highest risk of violence. And that work is important, and there's a place for it in a broader, comprehensive approach to safety in a community. But when we're talking about this intervention in particular, we want to be really clear with ourselves, with our partners, with our political leaders, with our funders, that this is about the most serious violence in our community and the people that are closest to it. So making sure that you are clear about that when you start, you stay clear about that as you go, and carry that through as you get further into the intervention. It's also really important to set and communicate clear outcomes for the partnership so everyone can stay focused on what it is that we're working toward. So if, for example, our goals are to reduce violence while also minimizing the criminal justice footprint, we should be setting up methods to measure those metrics early on, and continuing to look at them, to report out on them, to learn from them, and figure out, how is this going? How are we doing toward these ends? And what can we be doing to shift to make changes in our approach throughout to continue to have impact? Next slide, Michael. Another important aspect when we think about sustainability is really formalizing the partnership. So if you were part of the first session that we had as part of this workshop series, and hat tip to Dr. Talib Hudson, who's with us this afternoon from NNSC, who did a lot of that facilitation, you might recall the Retro Report documentary that we viewed together about how this work began in Boston in the 90s. One of the main important points, not the only, there were many, but one of the important points that were made in the documentary is that this work doesn't have to, and really shouldn't, wait for everybody. We can start getting this off the ground with a small quote unquote coalition of the willing. And by now, for those of you who have been part of a team that's gotten this work underway, that if you would wait for everybody in the city or everybody in your agency to get on board, you would be waiting still, right? This is not something that is easy to get people's head around, all together, all at the same time. We're asking people to do really hard things, to have, people from communities that have been most at risk of violence and with highest levels of violence and victimization, and law enforcement agencies and city government and social service agencies and others, across the city, to come together and work in a different way together with, a lot of differences and opinions and approaches and pasts. And so it's important to remember that this work can be launched with a small coalition of the willing from across, representing those three legs of the stool. And we have to graduate from that, right? So we can start there, and then it's important to, to keep our focus among that small coalition of the willing, and then work to build out and formalize structures and partnerships so that we're not relying on, oh, that's just their thing on the side that they do, right? This is something we want to be institutionalized within your agencies that you represent and with the city more generally speaking. And so with that, arguably the most important structure to think about putting into place, ideally in the beginning, but if you're looking back and you're thinking, we don't have this, it's not too late, is some sort of executive committee. So this is going to look different depending on your city. Every city is different. The partners, and the influence that they hold is different. But this is really crucial for accountability and sustainability. This committee should have all three legs of that stool represented. So we want to have executive level community leaders in this committee. We want to have important community-based organizations and social service providers that are playing a part in this strategy represented. City government leadership, of course, so city council, the mayor, and then law enforcement agencies, the head of your regional probation and parole, and the police chief, and the elected prosecutor. And again, that might shift, right? There could be a research partner that should be at the table. You all will know, based on your city and what makes the most sense. But there needs to be a place where there's a collective group of leaders who are asking hard questions about, is this working? Do we have enough resources dedicated to this? If we don't, why not? Where can we get them? Social service provider, I don't think you're holding up your end of things, or police department. It doesn't seem like you're minimizing your footprint, and I don't see arrests changing. That's not how this should work, right? So a place where there can be some checks and balances, and also a place for the project manager to escalate problems, and seek solutions. So that leads into the project manager. We've talked about this role probably almost in every single session, and hopefully it's not unfamiliar to to folks who have been to past sessions by now. It's crucial to have a project manager or multiple project managers, depending on the size of your city, to full-time be dedicated to this strategy. This is not something that can be done on the side, as a, like, let me do this for half of the time and I'll do my real job, my other job for half the time. This is a full-time, probably, honestly, beyond a full-time job, that needs somebody who is at a high enough level to be able to have influence, make decisions, code switch between partners, and be able to move kind of between the partnership of the three-legged stool. And this is a position that I'll talk about in the next slide. We've thought about and have learned from partners about kind of where they're best situated, but I'll save that for the next slide. And so next is thinking about different working groups. And I won't prescribe a specific structure, because the role that we play in working closely with cities is learning first, how are your partnerships? What do your partnerships look like? How do you work together? Who's responsible for what? How are your systems set up? What existing structures and information sharing spaces exist, and can we think about building on those or modifying those for the purpose of this intervention. That said, there does need to be a core working group in place. And if you have done this work in partnership with NNSC, and I know some folks on the meeting just from our breakout session, I know you have. Hopefully this sounds familiar. It's usually the project manager, the law enforcement lead from the police department, so somebody that's been dedicated to really own this on behalf of the police department, represent the chief to a point, and be able to make decisions about resources and make sure that things are going the way they should. Sometimes it includes an assistant prosecutor or a probation officer or a probation officer, a representative from your outreach and support structure to be able to talk about that leg of the stool, a community-based partner, perhaps. It depends on the city and information sharing and what's happening in this working group. And oftentimes it's somebody from NNSC if we are in contract, where it's really a problem-solving space. This is, day-to-day, the hundreds of decisions that come up every day about, how are we moving, who needs to be involved, how are we communicating about this, what are we doing next? A small group that's really driving this in partnership with and being led by the project manager. Similarly, there should be spaces for support and outreach or community violence intervention partners to be able to come together, share ideas, make sure that people that are reaching out and seeking services are getting what they need. People are not following through the cracks, doing case conferencing if that's something that's needed and available. If there are service gaps, identifying them and figuring out, who's not part of this table. If we have a handful of agencies at the table and all of our needs aren't being met, or all of our clients' needs aren't being met, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to meet that need? Maybe that table can figure it out. Maybe that table needs to escalate it to the project manager to lift to the executive committee to help problem solve that. In terms of the community, we've had cities that have had successful working groups in place for their community moral voice partnerships. This has looked differently in different places and is an area I think we have collectively still a lot of room to grow in. But where this has been done well, cities have had their community-based partners come on a weekly basis or every other week to come together to talk about how things are going, if they're engaging in custom notifications, if they were at a call-in, how did things resonate to them, what do they think about the intervention so far, sharing ideas about how things could be improved. I think the important thing to be thinking about as it relates to our community-based partners that don't have a formal organization-based role, they're not part of an organization that's at the table in a formal way, is how do we bring them in and not just be asking, but making space for them to be adding and sharing their voice with the strategy in a meaningful way. And then lastly, in terms of the working groups, we encourage there to be a multi-agency law enforcement group of people that can be called upon and convened as needed to share information about recent violence, to work together and collaborate around a potential enforcement response if needed. And that's usually led by that law enforcement lead. And then lastly, as it pertains to formalizing the partnership, is making sure that there is a process called a shooting review in place in your city. And there are kind of law enforcement, strictly law enforcement ones, or ones that are mostly law enforcement that might have a couple people from your Office of Violence Prevention present. There are law enforcement ones that have a parallel community-based version of that in place, so that law enforcement can talk about recent violence and move that information to community-based partners to think about responses to violence that don't include law enforcement. But what this really boils down to is making sure there's a space where the right people are in the room talking about every single shooting and, fatal or non-fatal that happened in the past week, to know, what happened, who was involved, what are our working theories on this, not necessarily to the end of an arrest and prosecution, but to the end of getting ahead of the next one. So how can we support the victims and their friends? How can we make sure there won't be retaliation? How can we be giving the right attention to the people that might have been on the side of the actual shooter, so that they're getting, they're getting the attention that they need from the partnership, but also being offered support. So this is really the heartbeat of the intervention, is coming together, talking about what's happening today and what we can do today and tomorrow and the following days to respond to it. Next slide, Michael, please. So just saying a little bit more about structures. So I know that there are people here representing different offices of violence prevention in your cities, which is fantastic. These, and as well as offices of neighborhood safety, these are increasingly being established in cities across the country, which is incredibly helpful for strategies like the group violence intervention and other community violence interventions. This is often the best place to house the project manager and any identified and hired case managers, outreach workers, employment specialists, therapists that are part of the partnership, any staff member who's being hired to be part of that outreach and support leg of the stool. It's helpful for them to be housed, if there isn't another place where they're already hired and working out of, to be housed in this type of city government office for sustainability purposes, for coordination purposes. Another important way to sustain the work, it can be to establish formal agreements, like some kind of MOU with community-based organizations that are providing support and resources to GVI. This allows those organizations to properly, staff and plan in a somewhat longer term, to be able to continue to show up and provide that support. And then something just to know about and to be thinking about, if you're not already, is that there are statewide initiatives for doing this kind of violence prevention work underway. There are a few that we know really well. So one is in Connecticut. There's one in New York State. We have a new partnership with the state of Virginia out of the Attorney General's office to do GVI across a number of cities. So it can just be helpful for, kind of state level coordination, as well as funding. And that can be something to be thinking about and paying attention to. And those aren't the only three. Those are just the three we work with most closely. Next slide, please. And so once you have those partnerships in place, it's important, of course, to tend to them, to think about managing and making space to foster those relationships. For those that are in the Zoom room that have been in or are currently in that role of the project manager, and we have a couple people on staff who were previously in that role and are now working with us, and they're both not here, otherwise I would ask them to speak to this themselves. But they will tell you it's a really lonely job, and it's a really difficult job. You're put in a position where you have to get a lot of people to do things, but you don't have authority necessarily to direct them to do things. So it's about compelling people, reminding people of the mission, keeping people focused on the task, being able to help them see how this benefits them in their role, and relying on the fact that we're all here for a common purpose, which is safety. But that can be really difficult and lonely. And so, NNSC has spaces for those partners to come together and share ideas. But if you're in a position in your city where, in city government, or in another leadership position, I just naming that it would be responsible for the city to be thinking about the project manager, making sure that they have, the supervision and guidance support that they need, but also the staffing support that they need to do their jobs fully. And then making sure that there's dedicated time and space to work through issues. So I spoke about some of those different working group, structures, having a core working group, having different social service or support places, tables where people can work together, and the same for law enforcement, and making sure that there's space to bring people together and work through issues is really important. So ensuring that those legs of the stool aren't operating in silos, and that we have dedicated places for people to be coming together, hearing each other talk about the work, sharing ideas and concerns and solutions, and making sure that we have organic space for that to happen, so we don't have to try to figure out a way to do it once an issue arises. Next slide, please. And then use NNSC, tap into our network. So if you're in a formal relationship with us, we have regular advising calls and meetings, maybe more than you would like. But, there's a method to our madness. We have regular workshops like these that, we're really glad to be able to have space for you to come, learn, share ideas. We have a vast network. So I wish I knew off the top of my head how many cities we were currently had present here, but I'm guessing it's at least 25. And that's incredible. We shouldn't have to guess, right? So if you have questions, if you want to hear from somebody about how they approached a problem, please reach out to us and we can do our best to connect you, to learn from your peers. And also thank you in advance and thank you for past time that you've given to partners that have already been, served in that sort of expert role and shared with your peers. It makes a big difference. So next, I want to talk about a little bit about funding the work. And there are a few different ways that we think about this. So the first is government funding, which can be at the federal level or the state or city level. Everybody knows by now about the influx of money we've seen over the past couple years from the federal government for violence prevention work in particular and violence intervention work. I want to show folks a couple resources, and we'll share this around after the fact. But just while we are together, I'm going to share a DOJ website that I think everybody should have. And this is, so it's justice.gov/DOJ grants program plan. And I've spent a lot of time digging around the federal funding, and this I think is one of the more user-friendly tools. So I just wanted to show you, and then we'll send it. We won't spend too much time here right now. But essentially what this allows you to do is to filter based on the funding office, the expected release of the grant, particular subject matter. So if you're really focused on crime prevention or corrections, you can look based on the topic. You can do keywords. If you want to look at specific eligible applicant categories, you can. So for example, BJA provides a lot of funding for this type of work that we're doing. I know there's a grant that's set to come out probably in March, because that's when it came out last year for this funding. You can come and scroll and look at all of the grants, the total amount of funding. It doesn't have the deadline, which would be helpful, but you have to click in to see that. And the one I'm looking for is right here. So the BJA fiscal year 24 Office of Justice Programs, Community-Based Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative for sites, it's right here. You can click on it and it tells you a little bit about it. I don't think it's been released. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me. But this is a good way to just start thinking ahead and looking at, what federal funding is available. I know federal funding, the process is onerous. We have a little bit of experience with that, and we could answer questions as you have them. If we will try our best. One other thing I wanted to show you, and then we'll send this out again. So you can also look at every single grant that was awarded by the Office of Justice Programs as of today, essentially. And you can see, where it went. It tells you, it gives you like they're over here. Sorry, you probably can't see super well, but over to the right here, it tells you a description of the award, exactly how much it was, what agency it went to. So this is also just helpful to be able to look at, where's the money going? Could we get it? Is my city, can my city be competitive? This neighboring city got it. So just a few things to be paying attention to. Michael, could you pull the slide back up, please? And then I would just encourage folks to subscribe to the emails from BJA, the COPS office, the Office of Violence Against Women, if you have a focus on DV. because that's when they'll tell you when grants are being, when the solicitations are opening up. Obviously, there's other ways. Philanthropy, working to build relationships with your local foundations is really important and helpful, as well as private sector partnerships with businesses. There are, many different benefits for people, kind of across the spectrum. Even, businesses that you wouldn't think would have a connection to violence prevention, but it benefits everybody in the city for the city to be safe. So thinking strategically about building out those partnerships, both for funding your work as well as other creative ideas like internships for clients and so on, can be really helpful, especially once you have some work, a year or two under your belt, and you can say, here's what we've done, and here's where we could go if we had more support and partnerships. And then lastly, on the next slide, oh, sorry, before we do, I will restate the importance of ensuring that your community-based organizations and your community partners are being funded. We ask a lot of our community partners to, share their stories, to share their time. A lot of our cities are increasingly providing stipends to community partners for going out on custom notifications or attending call-ins, because they're typically the only ones that are doing that, not on their work time. So think about that early on, think about building that into your budget, and that, making sure we're taking care of all of our partners will allow them to continue to show up and keep the work going for longer. And then lastly, I wanted to just say a bit about managing the narrative and thinking about that. So you are your project, your intervention will have wonderful successes and probably really upsetting setbacks. And we want to be thinking about how to manage both. It's really difficult. It can be really difficult to, get a year or two under your belt, and then the person who is really spearheading it, the cheerleader behind it, maybe didn't get reelected, and the new person coming in says, we're doing something completely different, right? If you put the right structures in place, especially have strong community partnership and support, it'll be hard for that, for one person coming and going to change things, and it will be difficult still to manage. So making sure that you're thinking ahead, that this isn't something that's kind of rising and falling on one partner, will be really important in the long term. And then lastly, it's hard to remember to share our successes and wins. This is not work that we're typically thinking about in a positive way. It's really difficult. When they exist, find ways to share them, with your partners, perhaps more broadly with the media, if it's done in a careful and considerate way. But just don't forget to take a minute and say, it was hard to get here. Here we are, and that's great. So I think with that, I'll pause and pass it back to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, man. That was amazing as always. And I think a good complement to what we've been talking about thus far in terms of putting in perspective of the stool and those other facets that we've been kind of outlaying over the past few weeks and months in the other workshop sessions. And if you go back to last week's or last month's session, you could see the year in review and how kind of each of these pieces build on each other, and then how this sustaining the work and this momentum is kind of how you push all of it forward and make sure it's all kind of continuing to exist and thrive and grow, so the work could continue to exist and thrive and grow. But with that, I want to hand it over to one of our partners, one of our fantastic partners who's here today to speak about sustaining the work and allowing the work to thrive in their jurisdiction, Chief Carl Jacobson from New Haven, who is fantastic. So I'm going to hand it over to him to kind of speak a bit about what Megan was just saying in practice. So Carl, over to you, and welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I appreciate you asking me to come and speak about a topic that I love a lot. And I didn't always feel that way, and that'll be part of what my presentation is. And you know, I was thinking I was speaking to a very big group of different people, but I also see a lot of my own people from Connecticut on here too, which I'm excited about. Our partners from Clifford Beers and my own project managers on here, so that's great. Sustainability and keeping this thing going is extremely difficult. We started our program under the national network with strict guidelines with the national network, basically adhering to the strict model, which was good to start off, and having those almost daily phone calls with people from the national network in 2013. So we've sustained this for 10 years. And I'm going to quickly give you a reason why we have, because success makes it very easy to sell to any politician or any chief of police. I started this working with this program in 2013. In Connecticut, we call it Project Longevity. It's based in our 4 major cities in Connecticut, but it started out in 3 of the 4 major cities. And I would say New Haven's had most of a majority of the success, especially the sustainability. But our other cities have sustained it, and it has moved forward. First of all, we've sustained it where I actually went from sergeant in 2013 to about 2 years ago, I made chief of police. Never tried to do that. It just happened. And I think a lot of it was the result of this work and building relationships within my community. And it ended up going up through the ranks, but I'm the 7th chief in the last 10 years. So imagine that 6 chiefs before me changed, and we continue to sustain the work. So that shows you that it's sustainable. Mayor wise, I think we've been through 3 mayors. And it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult with a political change, a chief change. New chiefs come in, they want to do something different. But this was something that had to stay because of its successes. So prior to 2013, we had some really tough violence numbers. We're a small city of 135,000. My police force is budgeted for 400. I'm about 90 short right now, but we're budgeted for 400. In 2011, we had 167 non-fatal shootings and 39 homicides. We were marked as one of the most violent cities in the nation. But from 2013, from starting Project Longevity, starting group violence intervention, starting working more with partners from everyone from juvenile probation to our federal partners to our federal prosecutors. From 2013 to 2019, we averaged 65 non-fatal shootings and 11 homicides. That's radical change for violent crime, and we sustain that change. Then in 2020, things changed between COVID, and then into 2021 and the murder of George Floyd. We weren't able to do a lot of the stuff we did before, and our crime numbers, our violent crime numbers, like everybody in the country, spiked. But we never went. I think our worst year was 25 homicides and 110 non-fatal shootings. And then in 2021 into 2022, we started to pick up the work again. We were able to go door to door. We were able to have do custom notifications. We were able to do call-ins, which we couldn't do that right during COVID. We even had a call-in with 7 people, all spaced out, because we were dying to do the work again because we know it works. Going into 2022, we had 23 homicides and 76 non-fatal shootings. We've started off the year last year, we had 5 homicides and 18 shootings. Right now we have 2 homicides and 3 shootings. 2 homicides and 3 shootings in 2 months in a city that had seen a lot of violence prior to that. And the only thing different we're doing is we're reverted back to group violence intervention, custom notifications, call-ins, working together with our partners. So what it did for us is we arrested a lot less people, but our violent crime went down a lot more. Here in New Haven, we started what we called a daily shooting review, what was also your daily intel meeting. We now do it 3 days a week because we're able to do that because we've been able to work it out that better. But at first it was 4 days a week and we had a ComStat on Thursday. And in that meeting is every law enforcement entity you could think of and our project manager from Project Longevity, and some of the other statewide coordinators from Project Longevity will come in there as well. But you had everybody, the federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, FBI, DEA, ATF, and every division of my police department was ordered, it is and was and still is ordered to come to this meeting. And that started in 2016 after doing Project Longevity for a few years, because we knew the messaging was good, but we saw that our enforcement was not as good because we still operate in silos in criminal justice, right? So FBI was doing their thing and the other one was doing their thing. So the big part of this daily intel meeting was to get buy-in. And the only way it would survive to today, where it goes on today, well, we have one tomorrow, we have it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday now, was the buy-in. And that started by having strong leaders from my police department saying to our partners, you will not have task force officers, FBI, unless you come to the table. And then when they came to the table, a lot of people were reluctant. I brought in probation, parole. I had officers and detectives going, what's probation and parole doing here? They're not law enforcement. They can't hear what we're doing. And I'm like, really, idiots? They're law enforcement. You know, they're all part of law enforcement. Now, some of the best relationships my police officers have and the people they turn to first are probation and parole. And there's no miscommunication between all these parts. But that took strong leadership. When I was told, you're going to go do customs and call-ins, so basically, in my opinion, as an old school cop was, you're going to warn people, and then you're going to go after them if they pick up a gun. Oh my God, how am I going to do that? I'm warning them. And I didn't buy into it until I started to go to those houses, knock on those doors, go to those call-ins, talk to people, and see the change. There was a change. Now, sometimes they're very small, sometimes they're very large, but we know when you're dealing with groups and gangs, and we had a lot more of them back in 2013, it's retaliation. I shoot you, you shoot me, I shoot your friend shoots my friend. And the quickest way to block that retaliation is not by arrest, it's by things like custom notifications. And we started really hitting the ground on customs, showing up at people's doors 2 days after they shot somebody. And you know what that prevents? Them from going out and shooting someone else that night. So I saw the change and I started to buy into it myself. Then I kind of ran with it for my bosses who were very strong about it. So I would say one of the first core things you need is strong leadership. And it doesn't matter if that leadership changes, because back in about 2018, I actually wrote policy and procedure into our police department about these intel meetings and these how the intel meetings operate and how Project Longevity operates. So it became part of what we do on a daily basis and what we do. And again, the successes. In the beginning, I remember the FBI begrudgingly going because they didn't want to lose their task force officers. And then within 2 months, we had a case where West Haven PD, which is to our south, and East Haven and Hamden, all neighboring towns, had multiple robberies. Then we started having multiple commercial robberies. Well, West Haven had a palm print. They were able to get something off their robbery. Working together in those intel meetings, we were all able to put together who the crew was, and we made an arrest within a week, and we gave it to the feds to take it as a federal robbery because it was about 15 robberies. Success breeds longevity. Success breeds people coming back for more. And that's what happened here. And it's little successes, but you got to harp on those little successes. You got to say, hey, this is what we did before. Let's keep going. And then just to give you some examples of crazy stuff that happened in the city, we had a fentanyl overdose in, I want to say it was 2018, 2019. We had 7 deaths and 35 overdoses in one night. Well, everybody knew where to go. Even the fire department and the doctors from Yale, New Haven Hospital, showed up at our intel meeting to say, what's going on? This is what I know. How are we going to put this together? And that was on a Thursday night where the deaths occurred. We met on a Friday. We made arrests federally with the DEA on Monday morning because we worked together. Now, I talk about sometimes the national network, well, they used to do it more, but send me across the country to talk to policing agencies. And these are the successes I'm talking about. You take those little and big successes and you just keep going with them, right? You keep running with them. And we were lucky because we were able to sustain and have sustainability. You know, because you'll all know it being in law enforcement. Leadership changes. The DEA has a new boss. This one has a new thing. But we also started putting together major gang cases. We had a Red Side Gorilla Brim case where the ATF won their director's award. Well, those guys kept coming back. And to this day, they're a huge partner with us because everybody started seeing their own successes attached to the group's success, and we were able to sustain the work. Back to the daily intel meeting. It got so popular that in the beginning, you know, prior to COVID, it was always on in person, that we had a full room. We almost had to like open up a secondary room. We had the postal inspectors coming and passing off information we never heard of before, right? So we continue to run with that. During COVID, again, we went to intel meetings on Zoom. That was very successful because of the fact since then we picked it up. Now we still have that one in person on a Monday because I think it's important. The PD provides coffee, donuts, bagels. Everybody comes and meets. And it's those side conversations after the meeting with someone from probation or someone, the project manager of Project Longevity or something else. And how those meetings go is last night there was a shots fired on 10th Street. Who knows what happened? The intel detectives, the officers, the federal agents will talk about, well, Johnny Smith, he's involved in that. He's shooting at Joey because Joey was with his girlfriend. And then now that Project Longevity has had so much sustainability, you'll say, oh, we're working with him. Or probation and parole will be like, oh, we have him on a bracelet. And we're able to react as quick as possible to these incidents. And every group that we involved and we opened up our doors to, it just got bigger and bigger and better and better. You know, today we work with, there's a lot of my partners here from Clifford Beers. Every time there's a homicide or shooting in a neighborhood, they come out and walk the streets with us. They've become such big partners that they're part of the funding for Project Longevity. And I mean, we just turn this little, the smaller schematics of what the national network taught us and just involved everyone. And policing, it's very difficult. I'm telling you, back to those silos. But if you're the first one to reach your hand across that table, you're going to get tenfold back. And that's what we saw. I was forced to do it. I had a good leader who said, listen, you little jerk, you're going to do it. And I did it. And then by watching these successes and realizing, you know, having a city of the size we have with 39 homicides, as a police officer, all you want to do is make that city safe. And we just took each success on top of success and said, how are we going to use this group, this working group, and turn it into something better and keep it moving? And like I said, things like leadership, writing it into policies and procedures. Oh, funding. I want to touch base on funding. In the beginning of probably 2013 to 2018, very limited funding, enough funding to pay a project manager, enough funding to have, a couple of different housing vouchers, so very little funding. But what we did is we pulled in partners, nonprofits from throughout the city and got them involved and working with us to help people. But we still weren't there. We had the enforcement side down. We had that concentrated enforcement. We had that intelligence. We weren't just locking up people to lock up people to calm down a neighborhood. We were talking to or locking up the right people. And that's what this program has shown me. But on the social service side, we were falling short. I want to say, I think it was in 2019, 2020, the Justice Education Center, a nonprofit, took over as the managing partner of Project Longevity for all the sites. Myself and the director there, Sherry Halloran, we went on and petitioned the legislature for more money, and we got the thing funded. And, we've never seen the amount of money that we've had now, but we went to the state. We still have assistance through the city. The city also has a community resilience team and different entities that work directly with us. But funding wise, it all comes through the state. It funds the 4 major cities, We are branching off into 2 cities out towards Rhode Island now, Norwich and New London, all due to having this managing partner that's been able to assist us in the collection of funds, hiring and firing, and that type of thing. So even if, and I'll revert back to my second project manager was a pastor from the city who hated the police. So let me tell you, it didn't work out very well. That he would come to our meetings, he would go out and say the police are terrible, and it didn't work out. So, and I couldn't get people to buy in to talk to this guy because he hated the police. He actually wrote an editorial about his dislike of the police. Our second project manager, which even the national network, I don't know if it should be law enforcement because that was their model. We bent the model a little, and it was a retired homicide detective, but he was an African-American guy that grew up in the city and lived in a tough neighborhood of the city, retired law enforcement. Excellent. He got it. He knew what the community needed and he knew what the cops needed. He knew how to speak to both sides. And sometimes that's extremely difficult. You need leaders within the police department that can talk to their cops, but that are even better with the community. And between me and Stacy and a couple of really good prosecutors, we really got this thing going. And we're able to build the daily intel meetings, which you could call daily shooting reviews, and whatnot. And we still did the national network model where every 6 months we have a full shooting review. Every 6 months we have a full gang and group audit. But daily we were able to get this information and react to it accordingly. And we also, Megan had said, funding from other entities. We actually got funding from IKEA, which is a local Swedish furniture store, right? They were tired of the violence. It hurt their business. They gave us something crazy like $100,000 grant to help us sustain the program. So you can get funding from crazy places. You can, it's just about not giving up, right? If you know, I'm one of those guys who listens to those inspirational things on YouTube, right? And I felt many times in this program, even with Lori at my side from the national network, that we were at a turning point. Oh, this new chief, he's not going to do it. And we would say, well, Stacy Spell, Lori, and I, we got to get him to do it. And we would put up our argument and say, this is why it's working. And numbers don't lie. But if we hit those turning points and we move forward, because if you give up, it's never going to happen. And it's tough. Like I said, I had a really strong-headed, good boss that started me in this. The chief at the time was Dean Esserman, who knew David Kennedy from way back. So that was a great connection. You know, now it's ironic that you know, we've taken this horse and done it for 10 years, but it's possible. If you ever told me in 2013 that I'd be on a thing, first of all, that I'd be chief, I tell you, you're crazy, but I would be on a Zoom pushing this as something that reduces violence and is right for the police department and the community, I would have told you you're crazy, but I believe in it, heart and soul. The other aspects of it that we were able to turn people around and get people, especially community-wise, in is the national network taught us about police legitimacy and procedural justice and giving people a voice and simple things like that. And I not only, as I became a leader and assistant chief, not only did I tell my people to do this to the community, but do it to your own officers too. Give them a voice, treat them with dignity, you know, and we were able to build something here that I think is very special and sustainable. Of course, we were able to spread that with the Justice Education Center to the amount of funding that we need. You know, you never have enough money, but we're getting there. So I would just say there's simple things, keys to this. During my time here, the national network has probably had 10 countries and 20 police departments visit us. And they'll come to the daily intel meeting, and then they'll stay with us and we'll talk about the things that we do to become successful and to reduce violence. And I think that was a big thing too, because when you started to feel like, is this really working? And then you heard stories from other cities, and the other cities that came here and looked at what we were doing, they were like, wow, this really works. Yeah, it works. And we were able to continue to sustain the work. I should have put a timer on. I think that's my time, but I'll let Michael tell me different. And I wanted to take any questions.
That was fantastic, Carl. Thank you. You really got at what Megan was kind of putting forth as the pillars of sustainability, which are that institutionalization and the policies you drafted, getting that funding, getting that strong leadership, the buy-in. So thank you for those real world examples, which are fantastic. And now we're going to, Carl, we're going to hold questions for one more quick presentation from my colleague, Rachel Teicher, who is going to, speaking of Sweden, talk about one of our great European partners, Malmo, Sweden, and how they've been able to sustain the work. And then after that, we'll take some questions. But if you want to start putting them in the chat, we'll read them out after Rachel's presentation and go from there. So over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Michael. And I will try to be concise because I imagine folks have lots of questions and things they want to discuss after what they've heard so far. And I feel like Megan and the chief could not have set me up any better. I'm going to talk very briefly about the work that's been happening in Malmo, Sweden. Chief Jacobson has hosted them as recently as November. So it kind of comes full circle, and not just because of the IKEA connection. We began working with a city in Sweden named Malmo back in 2017. They, at the time, were known in the press over there as the Chicago of Sweden. And to all of us, that might seem a bit of an exaggeration, but given their culture and their context, the levels of violence that they were seeing, in particular, the levels of shootings and homicides, was unfathomable from what they were used to. And so after sitting down with us and thinking about it, we worked together to pilot what it would look like to adapt GVI to the Swedish context. And everything that we've heard so far translates in Sweden. Whether it's thinking about how do you focus on the small numbers of people that are driving the violence, right? To how do you get the equivalent of a three-legged stool when you know it's going to look a little bit different than it might here, right? Or in New Haven, or in South Bend, or in High Point, North Carolina. Over the past almost 7 years now, they've gone from a pilot of GVI, which was called Slutenhut, to a nationwide implementation of GVI based on that pilot. For them, as a small city, they are neither the first nor the second largest city in the country. What has kept them going, right, has remained those key pillars that we talked about and that Megan highlighted right at the beginning, and that Chief Jacobson name-checked as well. And these are the things that you'll hear us say over and over again. At the heart of it, right, are the partners. The fact that there has been and continues to be a coalition of partners that choose to do this, and the table keeps getting bigger. So whereas at first they thought about this on a smaller scale, focusing just on their own city limits, they now, 7 years later, are not only working with their neighboring jurisdictions, but they provide peer support throughout the country of Sweden, right? And they are able to do cross-cultural peer learning with our domestic sites. Being able to maintain these relationships and continually have the opportunity to refresh your thinking and have new opportunities for collaboration is a big part of what has helped them stay focused and innovative in their work. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that their project management team has really been at the heart of everything, right? From being able to champion this work in and outside of the country and make those connections throughout the police, probation, civil society, which is how they talk about community, and NGOs, which is what we would think of as our nonprofits. They have really continued to hold this work, not just to a high standard, right, but to the principles that they believe in focusing on making a genuine and authentic offer of help, right? Being creative about how they engage with people, being precise and managing expectations about what their follow through and follow up looks like, and being open to thinking about how do they address the violence that they're seeing in their city and in their community in a way that feels aligned with the principles that we talk about and we work from here at the NNSC. One of the things that they've been able to do now, nearly 7 years out, is expand their focus. So what was at first a pilot and then considered something that would be institutionalized in how they do violence prevention work has now expanded to include a focus on intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Using a lot of the same principles that we work on for GVI, we have adapted our US-based intervention for thinking about high-risk intimate partner violence for the Swedish context. For them, it's just another step in being able to change the culture, not just in how they practice as partners, right, but to change the culture in their own community about what it means to talk about violence and be engaged in violence prevention and reduction. And we have many friends in the audience today. I will say I'm thinking about some of them and some who couldn't be here, who have found ways to sustain the work, in part because they are not afraid to ask hard questions, get really hard feedback, and often pause and reset. And that's one more thing that I would highlight that our Malmo partners have done. They are going into what they call their 3.0 of their strategy, where they are constantly kind of going back to the table, looking at what's working and thinking, how do we improve? Right? Whether that's an increase in what it means to engage community, right? And for them, really working to bridge between government, which is often the social service support there in Sweden, and the people that live in communities that are experiencing gun violence. So what they have reported to us with a lot of humility is that they're really proud of the work they've done. They may not always get attention for it. And like Megan noted at the start, they often have to challenge the narrative, right? Although all violence is unacceptable to them, being able to reduce the number of people who were shot, the number of people who were shot and killed by any degree is a success. Being able to increase the chances that someone who is at risk will return a phone call, right? Will show up to meet with someone and think about services or relocation. That is a really big win. And now for the first time in many years, what they can say is only one person in 2023 was killed by gunfire. Right? That is their lowest number in 10 years, right? For them, right, it is still one too many, right? But being able to hold on to what they see as real successes, despite the challenges, despite what the narrative might be of still being talked about as the Chicago of Sweden, right? They continue to keep their heads down and focus on how do we keep doing the work that we know works, right? With integrity and authenticity. And I know that they give their regards. They wish they could have been here today to talk about the work themselves, but it is nearly 10 o'clock at night for them. So they are thankfully offline and enjoying their evening. I'm going to pause there. There's so much we can say about a number of the cities we worked with, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Michael, for questions and discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. And yeah, just in the end there, you actually tied right into one of those pillars, which is celebrating the successes of NAMO, even when they're not here, and making sure that that story is being told and those amazing numbers are being shared and things like that, which is fantastic. But now we have some time, so we want to open up questions for any of the speakers today. Chief Carl Jacobson, Megan, Rachel, questions on sustainability in general, any specific facets that Megan or Rachel or Carl touched on, or any thoughts that people might have that they wanted to kind of share while we're in the group setting. So you could throw questions in the chat or raise your hand and we could go from there. I know my colleague, Dr. Talib Hudson, always says that we should let 7 seconds elapse before kind of prodding the audience again. But I won't start badgering people to ask questions. I had one that I would throw to the group to discuss, and I know Megan touched on this. And this goes back to something that we talked about in an earlier workshop, which is the initial planning, because I know a lot of folks here are new to this work or potentially new to this work or onboarding or interested. And I'd ask, what are some of the most important, most critical things a site can do when they're in that initial planning, very, very early phase, that would ensure the sustainability and success? Like, what are the most foundational things that a site could be aware of and be implementing as part of the sustainability?
I can speak to that, but excuse me, I was waiting to see if any of our partners doing the work wanted to jump in. I won't call anybody out, but I do see some names that I know you've been doing the work for a long time. Anyone want to speak to that from your experience? So I think it's buy-in, and Chief mentioned this, but I think having buy-in with the right leaders, you know, with the right people, the leaders across the city is really important. And without that, it's difficult. I know that there are, for people that have been doing the work for a while that are on, you know, you might say something different, in which case jump in. And for people that are trying to build it, I think this is, you know, there's a lot of work that happens in the early, you know, months and years even, of enough people in the city deciding we need to do something different. What we've been doing hasn't worked, or we've tried this before, it worked and we let it fall apart. Now we need to get it back up and running, or some version of that, right? But I think it's spending time to make sure, you know, the mayor's on board, the right council people are on board, if not all of them. The prosecutor plays an important role. The probation plays a crucial role, right? Making sure we have people in those positions, obviously the chief, and then making sure we're engaging with the right community-based organizations who are closest to the work on the ground, and getting people collectively to the table, and then making sure people know what it is we're talking about, right? This is a shift, maybe not as much today in 2024, but for, you know, for Chief Jacobson talking more than 12 years ago, like, this is a really different way of approaching this problem, making sure people are clear about that, and are committed to that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say that not giving up. I mean, you have to select the right people. So the assistant chief I was talking about before is this little Italian guy, Archie Generoso, who just was a ball of fire, and he knew to pick me to lead it because he knew I'm a pain in the butt, but I'm gonna get the job done, right? And that you got to pick somebody within your organization that has the vision to see it happen, you know. so as I went up the ranks, I had to pick other people who kind of got it, and I knew that the other cops would rally around and follow whether they didn't like it or not, right? That's the same with the politicians you pick. Doesn't necessarily have to be the mayor. Some of my greatest allies on different programs are the alders, who are like our board of alders, that I knew were gonna see this for what it was and then carry it over the finish line. Because we've had 3 mayors, but we've had a core of alders who have been there for 15 years. So it's about understanding your landscape and that type of thing. And then one thing I didn't mention is personal relationships, person-to-person relationships. You could carry people to a different place. Kate Gunning's on here. She actually works for the National Network now, but she was a juvenile probation officer when we started this in 2013. And we used to do some of the stuff related to customs and seeing people. We had a grandmother. She came to juvenile probation. She had a younger kid that was involved in gunplay. And she said, sometimes I find guns in my house. What am I supposed to do? And I said, I will come get the gun and test it. If it doesn't come back to anything, no questions asked, I'll seize it. But if it comes back to a murder, then I got to ask some questions and do some follow-up. When she left, Kate asked me, can you do that? And I'm like, I have to now because I said I'm going to do it, right? And it was our relationships, individual relationships with other people that help carry the message and carry the torch. So it's a lot about picking the right people to go on this journey with and then sticking to it.
Great answers from you both. Thank you so much. I'm going to pivot to questions from the chat now. The first one is from Carl, who answered in the chat. The next question is, if you could share 3 key takeaways pertaining to sustaining CVI work, what would it be? So I guess the 3 most important things to sustaining the work, which I know we touched on, but what are like the top 3 for you, Carl? Just bullet points.
I would say leadership, relationships, being a little corny like I like to be, not giving up. But also, and we just talked about it, involving the right people.
And Megan, you covered a lot of that in your presentation, so I'm sure you
Yeah.
think the same similarly.
And funding realistically, but that goes without saying.
Yeah, and then just to add to that too, like we literally for so many years could only pay salaries. So I would say that's important, but that's not your give up piece, because eventually they see your numbers, they see they see our police department in a different light. My legislators looked and said, the New England Police Department are doing it differently. They're talking to these guys that are involved in groups and gangs. They're giving them a second chance. Boom, then the funding came.
That's great and important to know and take away. Another question we have is, good question. How do you overcome law enforcement's apprehension to share data with the project manager and the social service agencies? I don't know if Megan wants to take that, or Rachel or Carl.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to
Elizabeth.
hear the chief's perspective. I mean, if ideally this is an expectation that's set from the beginning, that this is, this is information that will be needed in order for this to work. And I think it's important for the expectation for that to be that it's one way, right? We want to be able to protect outreach workers, and their safety, and thinking about, what this maybe new dynamic or relationship looks like for them. And then if it's not happening, I think if you have this executive committee, these structures in place, this is how things get escalated, right? If Chief Jacobson says, this is what we're doing, we're moving differently now, and his sergeant is like, no, I don't trust these people. I can't share this. We don't do this. Maybe it's another conversation, right? So if it's already been blessed at the top, then it's kind of working those levels of the partnership to figure out how we can, reaffirm some of what was agreed upon. But Chief, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. I mean, we do have MOUs in place with a lot of the agencies we work with confidentiality agreements. That daily intel meeting is law enforcement only. So if my next project manager is not prior law enforcement. I can't, even though I'm sure I trust them, I can't go back on what I said to my people, right? So they won't be able to be in the meeting, but I'm gonna call them and tell them what happened probably, and my people know that, right? But just definitely MOUs, and you know, I just thought of something. When we started with juvenile probation, a lot of people didn't talk to us, but Kate did. So we picked different people that we knew trusted the system or trusted the police, because, right, a lot of people don't trust the police. Even in the agencies you guys work for, there's people who don't like the police, and that's okay, because it's our responsibility as officers to build that trust back again, right? So we would just only bring certain people to the table, and then more people would say, oh, this seems to be working out. Do they know anything about this kid I have, or this parolee I have? And it spread from successes.
And I'll just layer on that I think the personal relationships and the building of trust between partners is absolutely key. When we trust one another, when we can say hard things, when we know how to not say something to one another, it can go a really long way. And I think that can often make all the difference when it comes to information sharing.
Great, thank all of you. We have time for one more question before we wrap up, and I see there's one in the chat. When NNSC does a community analysis, what is their responsibility to share that information with the requesting group? So community shooting review or shooting analysis, I believe, is the question.
Or maybe, maybe problem analysis, or like site
Mhm.
assessment. Yeah, so Mr. King, if I'm not addressing this directly, let me know, or we can touch base offline. But if we're talking about a problem analysis, NNSC typically does that at the outset of any partnership. And we are, contracted to do that typically through the city. And then we return it to the contracting entity to share with other partners. But the purpose of, we don't do that research for research purposes. We do that for the purpose of the intervention. So it should all be returned back to the city to be used and built upon for the work.
Great, thank you, Megan. All right, so we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to share my screen one last time for a little bit of wrap up. All right. All right, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. This was the Sustaining the Work workshop, and it's actually the last planned part in the initial suite of our GVI Workshop Series. So thank you for attending them thus far. You could watch them all online, which I'll plug in a moment. But as for next steps, we're actually going to be collecting feedback and progress updates from folks who have been attending these sessions. So we really want to hear from you if you're a site who is interested in this work and has been attending this session, but we're not currently advising or under contract with or anything like that. We want to hear about how implementation is going, questions, challenges, anything like that. We want to hear from you, as well as the sorts of things that you think would be interesting or useful in future sessions like this or a future workshop series. So the conversations that we have with folks will inform the future sessions later this year in the spring or summer as we move on to phase 2 of this kind of workshop series. As always, you could reach out via email with any questions at gviworkshop@nnscommunities.org. If you want to send along any partners or folks or colleagues, anyone who's interested in being on our mailing list for materials, future workshops, anything like that, send them along. Our website is nnscommunities.org/GVI workshop, where you'll find the video recordings of all the workshops so far, the slide decks, any materials we shared, anything like that. So you could go back kind of as a library and see all the various parts of the intervention that we've discussed in depth thus far. But as always, please reach out with any questions. You'll be hearing from us as we reach out to you to learn about what's going on in your sites. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.